killed. And they've tried the reduction of pesticides through GMOs. Now, GMOs have been a hot topic lately. These GMOs are supposed to be the end of the use of pesticides by the genetically modified seeds having natural pesticides. But we've seen what the result of that is. Instead, what they consider to be pests have evolved, and they've moved past that. So now they're having to go in and spray on top of the genetically modified, natural occurring pesticides. Now we're getting double, because these people are smarter than we are, right? U.S. Senate, 1994, about a UN biodiversity assessment on sustainable human population. A reasonable estimate for an industrialized world society at the present North American material standard of living would be 1 billion people. This must be implemented within 30 to 50 years. 2/3 of the population must be cut. That's a nice way of saying killed or never allowed to be born. The UN says that property rights are not absolute and unchanging, but are there for the convenience of whatever government wants to do. Nobody owns biodiversity, so everything we do impinges on biodiversity. Property rights become meaningless. At the Rio de Janeiro summit, it was decided that the Global Environment Facility would be the depository of all property rights. Agenda 21. Also, Section 12.2, page 835, Agenda 21. The Western worldview is characteristic of large-scale societies, heavily dependent on resources brought from considerable distances. It's a worldview that is characterized by the denial of sacred attributes of nature, which became firmly established about 2,000 years ago with the Judeo-Christian Islamic religion traditions. What they fail to realize is Islam didn't come about 2,000 years ago. Islam wasn't created until the 7th century. Well, this same treaty considers rocks to be living beings on an equal plane with human beings. Rocks! Many believe these rocks will reincarnate into lower life forms and gradually be humans. Rocks! I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking the same thing. They got rocks in their heads. Can you believe this? You know, this whole idea of depopulation through eugenics and abortion, they want to use bioweapons, diseases, they want to use anything they can to depopulate the world. Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist. She promoted population control policies that included sterilization, race improvement through selective breeding. These were also the central ideas of the Nazi Party in Germany. Eugenicists, by the beginning of the 20th century, didn't support birth control as they believed contraception would reduce the birth rate among the upper and middle classes. This was a bad thing. The superior people would not be able to reproduce themselves. Well, in the 20s, the eugenicist position included birth control for what they considered lower classes, sterilization for idiots. In 1954, Hugh Moore established a pamphlet called The Population Explosion, which predicted an economic crisis caused by global overpopulation. Moore worked with Planned Parenthood, but he split with them over the abortion of women's rights as the leading strategy for population control. Moore wanted to dispense with rights and force everyone to comply with mandatory population control policies, just like China is doing today. Federal funding for contraception and abortion began under the administration of Lyndon Johnson. By 1997, state and federal funding for family planning programs reached $700 million annually of your tax dollars are paying for family planning programs. You know what family planning is, right? This is the freedom of abortion. Now, initially, the movement for family planning came from the believers in overpopulation. Later on, the feminists joined this overpopulation believers and redefined birth control and abortion as an issue of women's rights rather than the method of world population reduction. It became not murder, but a woman's rights. This was about a woman's rights. The first organizers of this anti-population movement was the Ford Foundation, the Population Council, the Population Crisis Committee, and Planned Parenthood. The pivotal figure in this movement was Rockefeller. Rockefeller organized the Population Council in 1952 to train people to study world population. He promoted as a natural, scientific organization. The Population Council actually consisted of experts who all shared a common goal of reducing the world's population. Population control came out of the post-war movement for this one world government. Hugh Moore and William Vogt of Planned Parenthood were the leading population control lobbyists around the world. Ellen Gutmuncher and Cass Cantfield of Planned Parenthood were also devoted to the population control. These leaders were supported by social scientists who believed that controlling the population would promote growth and economic stability. It would alleviate poverty, reduce crime and pollution, and ease the management of the welfare state. However, these qualities of life values are just soft liberal ideas. No research has been done studying causal relations between population growth and the economy or crime or pollution or any other objectives when the population agenda became policy. In other words, these were simple, nice-sounding excuses to reduce population. The same excuses that we hear today. If the end result of what you're hearing is depopulation, then they're whitewashing it. Lyndon Johnson linked family planning with the war on poverty. You know, there was a key event of his administration was the Social Security Amendment of 1967. It was proposed by George Bush Sr., which allowed the federal government to fund programs through state agencies and private organizations. The system that emerged was led by Planned Parenthood, the Population Council, the Ford Foundation, which created demonstrated programs as models. These models were then funded by the U.S. government as well as private foundations and UN agencies. The UN has been involved in this from the very beginning because it's a global movement and a global genocide. Now remember, if we can get nationalism out of the minds of people, if we can remove God from every aspect of everything, then these people have an open path to do whatever they want. It is our responsibility as parents and grandparents to teach our national sovereignty and to teach the Bible and Jesus Christ to every one of your family members. It is your responsibility. If you fail, this agenda will succeed. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you're too afraid to spread the word, if you're too afraid to talk to somebody about Jesus Christ, if you're afraid they're going to call you a fruit and a nut, if you're afraid of what they might say or how they will think of you, then you're part of the problem. In 1974, the United Nations held a World Population Conference in Bucharest. After this conference, the Population Council endorsed abortion as a birth control measure. This position was not exactly new. Planned Parenthood and Hugh Moore had been attempting to revise these laws for over a decade. Planned Parenthood had consistently promoted sterilization and abortion as family planning. They focused on abortion rights, sex education after Bucharest, and they placed these issues under the term of women's rights. Because, look, women's rights and homosexuality are the fronts for world population reduction. If they could possibly turn everyone gay or lesbian, they could eliminate new births through those relationships. And if they push abortion as a woman's right, instead of telling them what the reality is, that you're murdering your own children. You know, I think people don't realize, most women don't realize how many abortions there are, not only in America, but around the world every single year. Every year. In America alone, it's 1.4 million abortions, babies killed through abortion, with Planned Parenthood as the largest abortion provider in the United States. 1.4 million innocent babies killed every year just in America. China is double what we are. Russia, with a smaller population than us, is about the same as us. What does this add up to? And I'm just talking about the major countries. Look how successful they are. How successful are these people in depopulation around the world? The population control movement has succeeded in enlisting the UN and other agencies around the world in a network of sex education and contraceptive programs. By 1990, half of the couples in the world were using birth control. 80% of couples in the United States were using birth control. Why is there such a big need for birth control? It's because they have taken what relations between a man and a woman is supposed to be, which is the production of children, reproduction, and they have turned it into a release or a recreational activity. That everyone has a right to this recreational activity, just like going swimming, going to play putt-putt golf, just go have some sex. That it's all the same. Doesn't mean anything. If you get pregnant, no problem. Come on down. Come on down. We'll take care of that for you. They have taken away the meaning that was intended for sex in the first place, which was reproduction. This is not a recreational sport. World population began to decline in the 60s. Now, isn't it coincidental that it was in the early 60s that they took prayer out of schools? And ever since then, moral crimes have doubled, sometimes tripled, every single year since then. Every single year since then. The number of persons living in poverty declined significantly in the United States, just as the program designed to address these problems was adopted. However, the number of out-of-wedlock births rose dramatically in the 70s. Why? Because it was the free love movement of the 60s that evolved into the 70s, which is really when it started becoming a recreation. so the population controllers switched their justification for government policies promoting contraception and abortion away from the rhetoric of world population crisis to sex education